Hi, welcome back to the JFK Cut and Paste Assassination. I'm Denise Hazelwood. This is the next installment, part 7, putting it all together. And as far as I know, for now, this will be the last installment of my video series. I'm going to be looking at pieces of the puzzle, showing you where my mindset was when I came up with my theory, looking at the evidence, the evidence that was impugned, that's provably fake, and witness accounts. And I might tell you a little bit about my own journey, which involves my own mistake of thinking that the frontal shot might first have exited on the left side, which was based on nothing more than my observations of photographic funny business in the left side autopsy photograph. So these are the things I keep coming back to. Uh, the best evidence, which is which should be the best evidence, the physical evidence, the autopsy report photos and X-rays, the assassination films and photographs. Um, they've been impugned, and once that happens, they're no longer the best evidence. That becomes the worst evidence. So then you have to go to other evidence, witness accounts, and things like that, which, we know that witnesses can make mistakes, but when you've got multiple witnesses saying the same thing, um, yeah, you have to pay attention to it. I'm also going to look at some logic that, the evidence of cover-up does not necessarily lead to um, a conspiracy to murder conclusion, a domestic coup d'etat or a regime change conclusion. So, okay. Again, this is just what I said before. The best evidence is impugned, so then you have to look at other things. The David Lifton's book, Best Evidence, is a deliberately sarcastic title, referring to the autopsy report, which should be best evidence, but in this case is the worst evidence. And looking at all the cover-up, why we know that the best evidence is the worst evidence. The autopsy photos fail stereoscopic viewing, don't match witness accounts. We've had statements that, quote, these are fake photos. There's anomalies like the head stirrup that wasn't used at Parkland, the telephone on the wall, and things like that shouldn't be in the autopsy photographs but are. In the X-rays, there's that fake 6.5 millimeter object, which some critics have noted supposedly sheared off the middle of the bullet and then migrated upward, which, yeah, it's laughable. The white patch on the X-rays, which is more dense than the most dense bone in the body, it shouldn't be that way, and yet it is. The perfectly circular burn mark. When X-rays are burned, they don't form perfect circles, and yet this one did. The computer, my discovery that the computer enhanced X-ray, or what's been called the computer enhanced X-ray, is actually a composite with the living X-ray. So, okay. There's also all the materials that have gone missing. The missing photographic views, the missing brain slides, the missing I'm not sure what the entire brain gone missing. The vial of bullet fragments that's missing. The pictures with the probes that are missing. And then there are accounts of the Secret Service burn party in which autopsy evidence was destroyed. The fact that there are 3 different autopsy reports: the, quote, burned original, the report to the family, and then the official report. And my discovery that the Hickey memo was not originally authored. So the Zapruder film, if you are interested in more evidence about the Zapruder film fakery, read the Great Zapruder Film Hoax, edited by James Fetzer. The other films, Orville Nix said publicly that frames were removed from his film. Evidence of photographic fakery. Phil Willis's daughter complained that there were trains in the original picture. So the ones that they got back from the government didn't have trains and they were not the original pictures. The Altkins photograph. Well, remember that we did see a version of the Altkins photograph the evening about 6 hours after the assassination. Um, Maybe a little bit more or a little bit less, depending. So, roughly 6 hours after the assassination, we saw a cropped version of the Altkin 6 photograph. And that version of the photograph may have been retouched a bit before it was actually shown on TV. And I'll show you what I mean in a little bit. Yeah, and I talked about the backyard photographs, which I believe have Roscoe White, a Dallas police officer, as the body double, and that wasn't discovered by me, but by other researchers, based on a little lump on his wrist. But anyway, when the backyard photographs were published, the Warren Commission was apparently upset about that, and they investigated it, and they traced it back to, quote, an enterprising young man in the Dallas Police Department. They didn't call out the photographs as fake, but that's what they did. Let's see. However, and the police department, Dallas Police Department, was one of the sites of the first conviction integrity units because they had so many wrongful convictions. There were the four, let's see, 90% of the conviction in integrity unit exonerations occurred in 4 counties: Harris County, Texas; Dallas County, Texas; Brooklyn, New York; and Cook, Illinois, which might show you the lengths that the Dallas police were willing to go to get their man, even if it was a wrong conviction. So, okay. Why the Secret Service would participate in the cover-up, besides the fact that it was an embarrassing accident, they were protecting a brother. The Kennedy detail describes how the Secret Service was a band of brothers. And also, Hickey might have been a member of the Kennedy family. JFK's maternal grandmother's last name was Hickey. So there's a possibility that they were, a probability, I would say, that they were protecting a member of the Kennedy family. And that would also explain why the Kennedy family has been silent for all these years. All right, looking again at witness counts, and I apologize, but I keep coming back to this. We look at our various pools of witnesses: the Dealey Plaza witnesses, Parkland Hospital witnesses, the autopsy witnesses, and some related witnesses like Sandra Spencer, Joe O'Donnell, who Sandra Spencer supposedly or disavowed photographs as being those that she processed because the paper wasn't right and things like that. Joe O'Donnell saw 2 versions of autopsy photographs, one that showed a wound in the forehead and another that showed no such wound. So that's how they're related. Common themes among the among the witnesses in Dealey Plaza, witnesses saw the limousine stop, and possibly there were 2 stops. In fact, I think there were 2 stops, or at least one near stop and then a second full stop. All of the witnesses talk about a back of the head blowout, not a front of the head blowout like we see in the autopsy photographs, but the back of the head blowout. Ear witnesses describe a double bang or some type of echo, as Clint Hill said, some type of echo. And if you've got a double bang, the official story of all the shots coming from the Texas School Book Depository cannot be true, because the type of rifle needed a certain number of seconds to to pull the bolt back and reload it and that type of thing. even with the clip. You had to pull the bolt back and ram it forward again and aim again. So you needed more time than a double bang would allow. Witnesses who heard a shot from the grassy knoll, actually, I think they heard a shot from near the grassy knoll, just in front of the grassy knoll where the follow-up car was. Reports that a Secret Service man was killed too, which they found out later was incorrect. He had just fallen over. He wasn't killed himself, but he had fallen over due to the sudden stop of the follow-up car. The smell of gun smoke on the street, which would have been impossible for a shot from the Texas School Book Depository, given the way the wind was blowing, given the distance between the School Book Depository and the street, and so on. And one of the gunsmoke witnesses that I keep coming back to is Senator Ralph Yarborough, who smelled gun smoke all the way to the hospital, and another patrolman who smelled smoke from the motorcade as it passed beneath him as he was on an overpass. That type of thing. More minor, the reports of a Secret Service man or men in Dealey Plaza after the assassination, when they were all supposed to be with their charges at Parkland Hospital. The reports of 40 or so or more tiny metal fragments in the x-rays, which were originally thought to be from a soft-nosed bullet. The number of shots was originally reported. There was some disagreement between 3 or 4, and then it was, quote, confirmed 4 by the news agencies. And in fact, I think it was 4 assassination-related shots, but and then we have Jean Hill, who said she heard 5 or 6, and I absolutely believe that she was correct. I think that there were 4 rifle shots plus 2 revolver shots, which weren't as loud and didn't, or maybe sounded like echoes because they weren't as loud, or perhaps were not counted by witnesses as being assassination shots because they were defensive rather than offensive shots. So 3 offensive shots, 1 accident, and 2 defensive revolver shots. Okay, talking again about the smell of gun smoke on the street that could be smelled all the way to the hospital, which matches with Colin McLaren's plume of residue that he talks about in JFK, the Smoking Gun. Again, the Secret Service man, I keep coming back to that, falling over like he was killed too. And there are witnesses who said the first shot was right after the turn, including Pierce Allman, John Connolly, Alan Smith, the child, who said that Kennedy was shot in the forehead, just as he saw Kennedy shot in the forehead as the car was passing by him, and he himself was standing underneath the window, or on the street underneath the window from which the shots were fired. Going back to the common themes and the evidence of the cover-up, I keep coming back to that. All right, here's the back of the head blowout, the graphic I promised. All the witnesses at Parkland Hospital, at the autopsy, at Dealey Plaza, who saw a back of the head blowout. And some of these are doctors, and you cannot ignore this many witnesses who saw that. There were also a number of witnesses, and very famous is the Malcolm Kilduff forehead point, where he points to the, when he says it was a bullet right to the brain, and he may have referred to that as a temple, and I've already talked about temple versus forehead confusion, which was a false start that I made. That's forehead. Temple is more on the side of the head. So, we also have a neurologist, Dr. Michael Chesser, who studied the x-rays at NARA and found in the forehead location small metallic fragments that were highly suggestive of an entrance wound. And even though it's not an entirely original x-ray, it's still a very interesting find because it's contrary to the official version of what happened. But we still do have, this was the Hiska skull X-ray, not the computer-enhanced version. And it has the white patch that is more dense than it should be, given optical densitometry measurements, as Dr. David Mantik discovered. Another thing that I keep coming back to is how the stories keep changing. You know, how the entrance was originally the EOP, external occipital protuberance, and then that got changed, moved up to the cowlick entry, and then back to the EOP. Um, uh, Hume's equivocation on where the entrance was, and other autopsy pathologists' denial that it was anything other than the EOP. And we'll talk about why they moved that entrance up 4 or 5 inches in a few minutes. Originally, yeah, let me fix this. Originally, the story was going to be that Kennedy was hit first, then Connally, and then Kennedy, which is what I think happened. And that became because then you had James Tague, whose story about the accident or the missed shot that caused his minor injury on his cheek. So from 3 bullets, it was started out to be JFK, Connally, JFK, and then it became the single bullet theory, JFK, and the missed shot that injured Tague. Whose stretcher was the bullet found on? Originally, it was JFK's stretcher, and then it became Connally's stretcher, so that they could match with the single bullet theory and condense 4 bullets into 3. So let me just come back up here and add Tague in parentheses as the 4th bullet, and so on. Okay. So originally it was Kennedy's stretcher, and then Daryl Tomlinson's testimony was, good Lord, I don't believe I have this many typos, was manipulated to make it, try to make it Connally's stretcher. And we also went from lone nut to a conspiracy with a missed grassy knoll shot, back to lone nut. And, you know, it's just kind of laughable. It's like a kid when they get caught in a lie, they tell you a different story. Okay, and this is why I think the Secret Service accident theory is correct. This is stuff I keep coming back to. Especially that the gun smoke witnesses, the smell of gun smoke. And there's other things, statements by John McCone that were recently, were in 2013, declassified, that showed that he participated in, quote, a benign cover-up that was intended to keep the Warren Commission focused on what the agency believed at the time was the best truth, that Lee Harvey Oswald, for as yet undetermined motives, had acted alone in killing John Kennedy. And then we have Jackie Kennedy herself in William Manchester's book, saying something along the lines of, what was so terrible was the thought that it had been an accident, a freak, that an inch or two here, a moment or two there would have reversed history. Now, that was not in actual quotes in his book, but since the book was based on interviews with Jackie Kennedy, you could assume that that's what she said. The Shanklin memo, the FBI memo, that said the gun that, quote, apparently killed the president was in the possession of the Secret Service, and that was on the same day as the assassination that memo was dated. The size of the cover-up, the extent of the cover-up was just, for it to have been a regime change, domestic coup d'etat, I don't think the others, all the photographic experts at Hawkeye Works, all the career professionals would have gone along with it if it had been a regime change, domestic coup d'etat operation. All right, so I admitted my original mistake in the in my trajectory for the for the initial forehead shot that exited the back of the head. But then we have the AR-15 trajectory, which we have this drawing from autopsy witness um, Francis O'Neill that was originally suppressed that describes an entry at the back of the head near the EOP and exit um, at the, just kind of above and behind the ear there. And oddly enough, that's kind of where the white patch is on those x-rays. So, and then we have the FBI Belmont memo that says there was one bullet was lodged behind the ear. So, okay. And if I had to guess, I'd also guess that in this white patch area, and this, by the way, is the quote enhanced X-ray, which is a composite of the living X-ray with the HISCA, or excuse me, with the autopsy X-ray. So if I had to guess, I would guess that this is where the burn mark was originally. Okay, here's a little bit about my own journey. I just started out by wanting to know if there was if the Donahue theory about the Secret Service accident held any water. And it did. It did. He may have gotten his trajectory wrong, but the rest of his theory still holds. And then my own finding of the Hickey memo anomaly, I found that in reading Mortal Error, which describes Howard Donahue's theory, how he came up with it, and all that. And I found most of the arguments against his theory to be unconvincing. I did eventually agree that the Cowlick entry was wrong, that the EOP entry was correct. But Donahue made his mistake based on false evidence that was given to him. So, or that he, the false evidence that was created. So we can't really blame Donahue for that. He did not know that the Zapruder film was a fake. That evidence hadn't come out yet. Okay, so that's just my own journey there. Eventually, I should have studied the acoustical evidence a lot sooner than I did, but eventually I did study it and came to the conclusion that the diagram showing the microphone placement, there is no supporting evidence for that whatsoever. Supposedly, first of all, that diagram was created by somebody who was not there when the acoustical tests were conducted in Dealey Plaza. It was based, quote, supposedly based on, quote, street features, which nobody can get a hold of that list of street features to look at. There are no photographs confirming that the microphone positions are correct or anything like that. And I believe that is all deliberate, that the microphone placement is deliberately incorrect, especially when we get into the, when the head of the HISCA was kind of giving a wink and a nod and saying, if you can prove to me that there was no motorcycle in the predicted locations, then that would disprove the acoustical evidence, wouldn't it? It was kind of a wink and a nod for researchers to do that and quote, and therefore quote, discount the acoustical evidence. Yeah, okay. So anyway, and all that I've talked about, the rest of that. So when you impugn the Zapruder film and that kind of thing, when you impugn it, when you show that it has been forged, it has been faked, the order and the timing of the shots can be brought into question. It's not the perfect evidence that you should use to align everything with. It's it's a fake. It was cleaned up to tell a different story, and it wasn't published until after Oswald. The photographs from Life magazine weren't published until after Oswald was killed. So, um, let's see. I was also thinking about the forward slump, or the slump that JFK had in um, uh, that you can be seen a little bit in what's left of the Zapruder film. You can see it in Mary Mormon's photograph where he's slumped toward Jackie. She says, "It must have been the first shot that got him, and you could see that in my picture because he's slumped towards Mrs. Kennedy." Um, yeah. So why would he slump after that first shot if he'd only been struck in the throat? I suppose it's possible he could have been going into shock or something, but I think it more likely that it was uh, that the first shot was a head shot. And he slumped because he lost consciousness. If he had only lost his air supply, it would have taken him longer to lose consciousness. And then I found I read Sherry Feaster's work in which she mentions decorticate posture, and I'm like, decorticate posture? What's that? So I looked it up and I said, oh, it's an indication that there's been severe neurological damage, and apparently Feaster discounts decorticate posture because she likes the Zapruder film. And hasn't quite realized that the Zapruder film is a complete forgery. Okay. And Kennedy going into decorticate posture could be the it that witnesses like the Newmans and Charles Brehm saw as the limousine was coming towards them. And probably slightly delayed from the forehead shot and possibly concurrent with a defensive shot, revolver shot by Warren Taylor. Okay. Uh, Prior to Donahue's theory, you had two sides of the spectrum. You had the lone nutters and you had the conspiracy theorists. The Secret Service accident offers a third alternative. So the lone nutters, also called the Warrenati, tend to refuse to accept evidence that is contrary to the official version. For example, all those witnesses who showed a back of the head blowout, um, those witnesses must have been mistaken, or they just simply ignore those witnesses. Um, they think the back of the head blowout never happened, and it was a front of the head blowout, and that's just that. Um, so they accept the impugned evidence, like the provably doctored autopsy photographs and the Zapruder film, over witness accounts or any other contrary evidence. In fact, they ignore the contrary evidence. And they describe multiple witnesses who've seen the same thing as being mistaken or attention seeking or just they're kooks or something like that. Okay, conspiracy theorists, they recognize the fakery of the official evidence, but then they come to the conclusion that it was a regime change or a domestic coup d'etat. And why do they think that? Because the evidence of cover up reaches into the highest levels of government and across multiple government agencies. So the cover up had to have been ordered by higher ups like Lyndon Johnson, CIA Director John McCone, Secret Service Chief James Rowley, FBI Chief J. Edgar Hoover, and participated in a myriad of other individuals, career people at the Hawkeye Works Lab. We've already talked about the Dallas Police Department and how willing they were to not necessarily follow the evidence, um, and so on. We already noted the Secret Service burn party, the Kennedy family silence, the missing materials that came from the trunk that Robert Kennedy had, and all of that. So here's why people think of the assassination as a regime change operation. They effected a regime change operation. A key to understanding this is the autopsy. If you look at the evidence of the autopsy and you conclude that a false and fraudulent autopsy was conducted, which you have to do if you look at the evidence closely, that automatically means cover-up. If they're going to falsify the autopsy, they're doing it for a reason. There can be only one reason, and this is where their mistake is. There can be only one reason, and that's cover-up. And that raises the natural questions as, why would they cover up? Who were they trying to cover up for? And that leads directly to themselves, the national security establishment. Well, that's the error, not the cover-up, but where does it lead to? It could also lead to covering up the Secret Service accident. Cover-up is undeniable, but the cover-up isn't necessarily for a regime change operation. In fact, we have John McCone admitting to a benign cover-up. So Donahue's theory and my variation of it explains why so many people would have been willing to participate in the cover-up. And look at things logically. Conspiracy to cover up is unmistakable. However, conspiracy to murder does not necessarily follow. The fallacy is false cause or hasty generalization or black or white fallacy or either or fallacies. And it's a false choice to say that it must be either a lone nut or a domestic coup d'etat regime change. The Secret Service accident offers a third explanation. And some researchers think that if Donahue's trajectory is wrong, his theory falls apart. It doesn't. It just means his trajectory was wrong. The rest of his theory was absolutely correct. If one part of a theory is wrong, it does not necessarily discount the entire theory. That's called argument from fallacy or fallacy. Then there's a couple of razors. What's the science the razors come from? Anyway, there's Occam's razor, which says the simplest explanation is usually the correct one. And then there's Hanlon's razor, which another person alerted me to, which is don't attribute to malice that which can be explained by stupidity. The cover-up was stupid. It spawned so many conspiracy theories. It was worse than the accident itself. The accident itself happened after a potentially fatal shot had already been fired. And, the cover-up, it was stupid. So I came to my conclusions by approaching the assassination from a different perspective, from the perspective that Donahue's theory was correct. And even though I did I changed my mind about his trajectory. I'd like the EOP entrance and the behind the ear trajectory, behind the right ear trajectory. It doesn't follow that because one part was wrong, the entire theory was wrong. The rest of the theory was based on the gunsmoke witnesses and the Secret Service man falling and that kind of thing. So, okay. I am aware of confirmation bias. I've tried to be on guard for confirmation bias, but everything that I read seems to confirm what I think happened. I've tried to be on guard for confirmation bias, but it could also be confirmation for what happened, right? So what did happen? I think there was an early first headshot with a forehead entry, back of the head exit, just after the turn onto Elm Street. I think that there were 4 rifle or assassination shots, 3 deliberate shots from the Texas School Book Depository, and 1 Secret Service accident, which you You know what I think if you've been watching my videos. I also think that there were 2 additional defensive shots fired by Secret Service agent Warren Taylor from a revolver. This was not a distraction shot. It was a defensive shot. And the cover-up was for an embarrassing accident to protect an innocent agent, and protect the Kennedy family from the embarrassment of having one of their own family members accidentally shoot the president. And I keep coming back to the back of the head blowout, and things I haven't mentioned yet in this video, which is that when all was said and done, Kennedy looked good, and he could have had an open casket funeral. The smell of gun smoke, the grassy knoll shot, or the shot that sounded like it was coming from right there in the car, the timing of the shots, the double bang, the forehead wound. Okay, so I've already talked about all of this. Some minor details, like 2 limousine stops instead of 1. Um, that others were injured during the shooting and were brought into Parkland Hospital much later, which I've already played that Dan Rather clip saying that. I've got my Ronnie Fuller theory, which I'm not 100% sure about, but it's a theory based on the absence of family with a child in the one photograph versus the Tina Turner film, that kind of thing. And then there's this, which is, I don't know quite what to make from that. There's always a chance that ricochet could cause a problem. This looks like somebody kind of draped over the railing of the fire escape there. This is in the Altgen 6 photograph. And, when you've got bullets being fired, even defensive shots, you have no way of controlling those. Once they've left the barrel, they could hit a surface and ricochet and rebound and go anywhere. So, okay. And there are still some oddities that I would like to find more information about. A couple of witnesses place a small wound on the right side of Kennedy's head or temple area. And here's some of this. You can pause this and read that if you want to. However, looking at the FBI, the Belmont memo, it talks about 2 and only 2 bullets striking Kennedy. And autopsy witness Tom Robinson puts a flap of skin blowout or something on the right temple area, which he marked this for the ARRB as to where he saw a flap of skin blowout kind of thing. I wonder if that might have been, we're going to come to this diagram later. I think that might have been the same area, just slightly misplaced on Robinson's marking, from the entrance in the back of the head to the exit behind and above the ear that FBI agent Francis O'Neill made for the HISCA some years earlier before Robinson made this diagram. So anyway, there's some questions about the X-ray of bone fragments that were supposedly brought into the autopsy while the autopsy was underway, supposedly found in the limousine. There are some witnesses in the autopsy who don't recall anything about bone fragments being brought in. The largest one of these bone fragments has been described as frontal bone, but how authentic is that X-ray of the bone fragments? I don't really know. It's kind of triangular shaped. I question the authenticity because of the witnesses who don't remember it, because it didn't seem to be described immediately in the autopsy, that kind of thing. and some other oddities that bear further exploration. Um, the wedge-shaped piece of bone that Jackie described in her testimony, which came from the first shot, and possibly you can see that in the Jim Towner photograph. Um, is that the Harper fragment? Is that triangular shaped fragment? What is that? So the X-ray could also be inauthentic evidence to confuse matters and promote the story of the front of the head blowout. Who knows? There seems to be, according to David Mantic, the radiologist, some frontal bone missing in the X-rays. But if they've added white patch, they could have added dark patch. Who the hell knows? I also want to talk about the oddity on Bobby Hargis's cheek. I already talked about that previously, but I'll show you another picture of it in a couple of slides. And Nurse Hall's story was very interesting because when she said there was a bullet between JFK's ear and his shoulder, my first thought was, oh, there's nothing between my ear and shoulder. And then in a separate interview, we could find that she meant on the stretcher between his ear and his shoulder. So it may have fallen out of his head, um, during a cardiac massage, or when that big chunk of brain came or fell out of the back of his head during the resuscitation attempts at Parkland Hospital, that sort of thing. All right, Robinson's triangular flap, possibly on the edge of the blowout hole. I don't know. But we do have Francis O'Neill's entrance in the near the EOP and exit above and behind the right ear. We also know that bullets don't have to exit completely; they can exit partially, as this image from Vincent DeMeo book on gunshot wounds demonstrates. Okay, so these are some of the questions that I still want to explore. I do think that 4 bullets were fired and 4 were recovered. The king-size fragment that fell out of Kennedy's back was from the first shot that entered his forehead, exited the back of his head, ricocheted off of the limousine seat, and entered and made a shallow wound in his back. And that same bullet probably also caused the throat wound from an internal ricochet. The fragment causing a fragment undergoing an internal ricochet and exiting the throat. The Connolly bullet was given by a nurse to a sheriff's deputy, which doesn't follow the official chain of command for the stretcher bullet. The manhole cover bullet, which burrowed into the grass near a manhole cover, and a fragment of that went on to cause James Tague's minor wound. The AR-15 pointed bullet seen by Nurse Hall and found later on the stretcher by Daryl Tomlinson originally came from Kennedy's stretcher, not Connolly's. It was the story changed for it to come from Connolly's stretcher as part of the single bullet theory to reduce 4 bullets down to 3. Okay. All right. The moving head wound from the external occipital protuberance to the front of the head blowout. That trajectory didn't work for the school book depository because when you adjusted Kennedy's head, this is what the Warren Commission published to make it look like it came from that. But when you adjusted Kennedy's head for its position in the Zapruder film right before the headshot, it doesn't, it actually travels upward. So then they moved the entrance up to the cowlick area to account for that. And I've talked a lot about the medical evidence fakery already. So when you put it all together, you get the forgeries in the medical evidence, the forehead wound, the first shot just after the turn, the Alkins photo with Hargis, who had something on his cheek, and Kennedy already in that throat grab or chest grab position, which I think is decorticate posture, and the phantom revolver being held by Warren Taylor and that sort of thing. And ear witnesses and the acoustical evidence. I've done that in another video. I'm going to skip that for now. The first shot, Warren Taylor in this movie, the president's limousine is up at the corner. This is the Marie Muchmore film. The president, this is the follow-up car. The order was the president's limousine, the Secret Service follow-up car, then Johnson's car. You can see the tail end of that here. Then Johnson's follow-up car. So this is on Houston Street before the turn onto Elm Street, and already you can see a reaction happening in that car. And I believe that the reaction is not, I don't think the shot has been fired yet from the school book depository. I think that uh, this is in response to somebody in the car seeing the gun in the school book depository, yelling, "Gun, gun," or whatever. But you can read, this is Warren Taylor's statement over here. This part right there is Warren Taylor's statement. And then I think that there's some dissemblance and or deception or whatever. This was the rejected dictabelt impulse. This timing would match the rejected dictabelt impulse, which was not as loud as the others. Now remember, Douglas Jackson would have been further ahead, and his mic would not have picked it up as loudly as later when he was closer to the follow-up car, the Johnson's follow-up car. And we get this article describing what Alan Smith saw. The car was about 10 feet from me when the bullet hit the president in his forehead. The bullets came from a window right over my head in the building in front of which my friends and I were standing. This was published the next day. And here's the Altkin 6 photograph with Bobby Hargis. Here's Bobby Hargis in the photograph. Here's a close-up of it, and you can see this oddly shaped thing. Is that the Harper fragment? Is that the triangular fragment in that X-ray, which I have questions about its authenticity? Who knows? But this is the explosive headshot has not yet happened. So this is after the first shot. Mary Mormon hasn't yet taken her photograph. Okay, this is Mary Mormon's shadow down here. And it looks like she's standing in the street based on that shadow. Rather than up on the grass. Okay. So here's some things that Bobby Hargis had to say. The limousine went about 2 or 3 meters down Elm Street when the first shot rang out. So we're talking 6 to 9 feet down Elm Street right after the turn, right? So, okay. In the What Survives of the Zapruder film that you can see on YouTube, you can see some reactions, like George Hickey looking down at something. What I believe happened is that a piece of Kennedy's skull is has hit the curb there, and that's what he's looking at. And in fact, Kenneth Skeers points out how the Secret Service agents on this side of the car are also looking over in that direction, and they're trained not to do that. They're trained, if you're on this side of the car, you're supposed to be looking that way. And if you're on this side of the car, you're supposed to be looking that way. And yet we can see Clint Hill looking more towards Jackie, which he said he was scanning the crowds over here, when he heard the shot, he looked over at his charge. He turned to look at the back of the limousine. And in that same Altkin 6 photograph, we see Kennedy in this position. Here's a close-up of it. Here's an even better close-up of it, or a larger close-up of it. And we see his fists right there underneath his chin at that level. What I'm not so sure about is this right here, because the angle from the shoulder down to the elbow, if that's his elbow over here, just doesn't fit. So I think that maybe something happened. They manipulated that photograph slightly, because I can't duplicate that angle myself when I try. And this is what decorticate posture looks like. It's the fists here, straight legs, the the elbows bent like that. So I do think that was decorticate posture, indicating a neurological trauma. And here we have Warren Taylor in that same Alkins 6 photograph, this area right here. Here's the gun, or the hand that looks like some doctoring has been attempted with it. Some researchers have called this the phantom revolver. You can see how bizarre his wrist is. From his wrist to, that seems like an awful long wrist, whatever. Yeah, and I think maybe this is where his foot is stepping out of the car or something. But remember, what we originally saw was just this much on the news. We did not see Hickey and this sign back here, which right above him, which I think was added into the photograph to kind of hide the barrel of the AR-15. We have Mary Moorman's picture, which I believe was concurrent with the second Texas School Book Depository shot, or the one that hit Governor Connolly. She herself said that, here we go. She heard pow, pow, pow. I think she missed the first shot because she was so excited about seeing the president that she missed it. But she heard this one that struck Governor Connolly, and assumed that it struck Kennedy because he was falling over towards Mrs. Kennedy at that time. She said it must have been the first shot that got him, and that does show in my picture. It shows him slumped towards Mrs. Kennedy. So, acoustical evidence I talk about elsewhere. This is another reason why researchers think that Mary Moorman's photograph was concurrent with the explosive headshot, because of the fakery in the Zapruder film. Here's Moorman with her camera, and here's the supposedly the headshot, the explosive headshot. And again, we can't trust the Zapruder film story. So I think they decided that that's where they were going to put the Zapruder, the headshot, because Mary Moorman had already been on TV and radio saying that she took her picture about the same time as the shot. But the evidence that it must have been the first one that got him was because he was leaning towards Jackie when she took her picture. Very interesting. In October, there is supposed to be all the information related to the JFK assassination is supposed to be released. October is only a week and a day away from where I am now. However, there are certain factions petitioning against the release of the information, and these are factions within the CIA. The only thing that can stop this is an executive order from Donald Trump saying not to release it. Otherwise, it should come out at some point in the next month. So keep your eyes open. I think if everything is released, it will prove that what I think is correct. This Politico article has the very interesting title of "How the CIA Came to Doubt the Official Story." when we've got John McCone saying that he participated in a cover-up, a benign cover-up, to keep the Warren Commission focused on what they thought was the official story. So you take that title with a grain of salt. So my book will give you more details and more source information. Please buy them. These videos, if you don't have the money to buy them, my videos basically summarize a lot of the information that's in my books. And remember, none of this precludes a conspiracy behind the Texas School Book Depository shooter. Was it really Oswald? Who was the power behind the shooter? I lean towards Oswald, but so much of the evidence has been fabricated against him that I admit the possibility that it could have been somebody else. So thank you for watching my video series. Stay tuned for future developments, maybe even within the next month. So goodbye. This is the end for now. Thank you.